So we just, started the new fiscal year like you did, and so it's been kind of a tough budget process. So we're seeing some fairly significant changes throughout our organization that's going to impact public safety services going forward, at least for this year, and probably beyond in some programs. As the community is probably aware, last November, the county ran the public safety levy renewal in November. It was overwhelmingly supported, 73%, over 73%. So that really helps ensure like 24-hour coverage and investigators, our emergency management and core security function. Unfortunately, as many of you have probably seen, the state is having some funding issues. But one of our programs, parole and probation, also took a substantial hit across the state. So as of June 30th, we had to lay off 40% of our staff. It's not very big, that was 2 people, but in the last 3 budget cycles, we've actually laid off now a total of 50% of staff there. Also lost in-house peer mentor and drug and alcohol counseling that we had in-house. So one of the cuts was a probation officer that was a 20-year employee of the county, but because of the union contract, she lost her job, and then we lost our work crew. Part of the parole and probation cuts. Parole and probation is funded by the state in 1995 passed Senate Bill 1145, and that Senate bill basically gave parole and probation to the counties. It was a state function, and the state said we'll fund it at this baseline. Every 6 years, it's statutorily required that they do what's called an actual cost study. And so they look at what does it actually cost to supervise somebody. So this year, there was actual cost study done, and the recommendation was, listen, this prices have gone up exponentially. We've seen inflation, and the cost of doing business has gone up. And so this is the number that, we need to do this. And the legislature chose not to implement any of the cost study analysis. And so it was a $61 million shortfall, which equates to layoffs across the state. And so there's definitely going to be impacts from that. But the funding is also tied to the amount of cases. And we've seen a steep decline in cases that we're getting that are prosecuted and that can be supervised. There's only certain types of cases that can be supervised, and mostly felonies, and then a couple of misdemeanors that qualify. And so we've seen a decline, but there's been a decline across the state as well. So there's a couple different reasons for those cuts, and we don't know what it's going to look like going forward. It's a big hit across the state, and I think the legislature is aware of it. So we're hopeful that maybe we'll get some funding reinstated, but it won't be until the short session in January or February. We also took a 30% cut in our Marine program, and that 30% of the Marine Board is funded through a federal grant through the U.S. Coast Guard. That grant could not be applied for because Oregon's designation as a sanctuary state. And so that money is off the table. And so every program across the state took a 30% hit. And what that means for us is we have a full-time Marine deputy. So we're going to have to go to basically 70%, actually a little bit less, because the funding that we got wasn't going to fully cover that position this year anyway. And so as a result, we had to eliminate another half-time deputy position that covered our U.S. Forest Service contract. And the Marine deputy is now going to cover Marine and the Forest Service contract, as well as we have an off-highway vehicle enforcement program, and we have a half-time deputy in there. And since 2021, the Sheriff's Office has managed a grant that's called Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness. It's a federal grant. And in the 2 grant cycles where we've been successful, we've been awarded over $300,000. We support the mental health of our first responders, and Hood River and Wasco counties, and then also the Clickatack County Sheriff's Office. And so that pays for in-house mental health counselors, a peer support team, and then some exercise programs, wellness programs, and app that's available to all of the public safety first responders. This year, we're set to add the frontier counties, Sherman, Gillum, Wheeler. And we were notified 2 weeks ago that we can't apply for that grant either because Oregon's designated it a sanctuary state. So unfortunately, that program is going to go by the wayside for the time being. Locally, the county was trying to find ways to impact PERS, and so about a third of our overtime budget was cut. And contrary to maybe the belief of some, overtime isn't necessarily desired by folks in public safety. It's a necessity. And so what we use our overtime for primarily is to cover shifts. When we passed the public safety levy in 2020, the commission at the time were very sensitive to what the voters would find palatable, and rightfully so. But we just got really the bare minimum in order to cover shifts. And so right now on paper we're full staff, but we're actually down 3 patrol deputies because we've had 2 out on medical leave and 1 still in training. And so you've got to cover those shifts somehow. And the unfortunate reality is that you utilize overtime. And so we're gonna, I'm a bit worried what that's going to look like going forward. We're going to have to manage it really closely, and there's a chance that it's going to impact services and some of the things that we do because we rely on having that budget and making sure that we can backfill in areas that we need to. Oregon has historically been ranked at the bottom of the nation. We were 50th at one point a couple of years ago in staffing ratios of law enforcement. And so, it's no surprise that you've got to utilize overtime when you don't have enough staffing in order to follow through on what you need to do. So our search and rescue funding is tied to the Secure Rural Schools Act, and it's Title III of that federal act. So our search and rescue, as you're probably aware, is really busy. We've been out recently with your fire department, who are phenomenal partners, by the way, and always have been. And our only funding in search and rescue outside of the occasional donation is that federal money. And as of today, it has not been renewed. So Congress needs to get on that. Hopefully, I know it went through the Senate recently, but then got kicked back because of some fiscal issues, and they took it out of the latest bill that passed, latest funding bill, and so they have to revisit that. I was reading up on it today to ensure that nothing great had happened, and it hadn't. So and then our emergency management program. So as you're probably aware, like in the storm that we had a couple years ago, emergency management plays a huge role in the recovery and getting grants and getting, your FEMA reimbursements together. Has played an even larger role in the last 10 years during my time as sheriff, because we've had so many disasters and emergencies. Eagle Creek Fire, of course, was huge. And so that role is absolutely critical in today's world. And so half of that program is funded by a grant called Emergency Management Program Grant, EMPG, and that comes through FEMA. It has not been cut, but it has not been reauthorized. So we started the fiscal year with basically a 50% cut. And so we're kind of scrambling to make sure that we can backfill that so that we have that service, because it's absolutely critical to all of our communities and, the mitigation and recovery. And our emergency manager has been doing a ton of work on community wildfire protection and working with a lot of communities. I think we have 9 Firewise communities now in Hood River County. He's been liaising with them, ensuring that the work's being done in communities, helping them obtain grants. There's an incredible amount of money that comes through emergency management, millions of dollars since I've been sheriff that help our communities prepare for disaster. So, we're fingers crossed that hopefully something will happen at the federal level with that, but we are a bit concerned. So, not the best of news, but on a positive note, our patrol is intact.